We're following God's story and the story of the Israelites, God's chosen people, which through extension our story, because now we are God's people. The Israelites are now in exile in Babylon. Now, the Babylonians were once the Chaldeans. So in other words, this is where Abraham came from. This is where Abraham was born. He was called by God out of Ur of the Chaldeans. That's the Babylonians. And they speak Aramaic. The Babylonians speak Aramaic or Chaldean, depending on what time period you're talking about. So we're now in the story of Daniel. And for those of you who like to take notes, you can't really overstate the significance of the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. The book of Daniel, more than any other book of the Old Testament, goes into detail about what's going to take place on earth before Jesus comes back again. The book of Daniel is the first book that talks extensively about people being raised from the dead. So the book of Daniel is very significant in the Old Testament. I'm in your notes now. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1 through 7. We don't really know much about Daniel. Of all the prophets, he's probably the one we know the least about. All we know is that he was of royal birth. He was born into a royal family, and that's really all we know about Daniel, other than what we read in the book of Daniel. Starting with verse 1, I'm reading from the NIV. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, or the Chaldeans, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. So here we are. God calls Abraham out of this very region because they are pagans, and he says, serve me, the one true God. They spend 400 years in Egypt, which is pagan. God delivers them from Egypt, and the Israelites never could, as a nation, as a whole, never could put away the false gods from the other nations. So now God is taking them into exile, and it's the very people that he called Abraham out of that's doing this. Daniel was one of the first ones to be taken to Babylon. There's basically three waves of deportation of the Jews, and Daniel was in the first wave. I'm on verse 3 now. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians, so they learn Aramaic. And we must remember, everyone was multilingual back then. We're unique in that respect. Everyone. It would have been odd to not be multilingual. Okay? Jesus, when he walked the earth, spoke Aramaic, which is what these people speak. Actually, Aramaic is part of the Hebrew language family. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah. And Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names, Babylonian or Chaldean names. To Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. These are the names that we know these three by. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. Daniel is a young man of very, very high character, just like Joseph. And as we go through the book of Daniel, we see that Daniel is very much like Joseph, the dreamer, the one who interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. Daniel's ministry is very similar to that of Joseph's. Okay? Now I'm skipping down. We're still in chapter 1. We're skipping down to verse 17. Skipping down to verse 17, still in chapter 1. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Again, he is very much a repeat of Joseph. Very, very similar. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Remember Moses when he went to Pharaoh. Pharaoh had magicians and enchanters and astrologers. And remember the first miracle that God performed through Moses when he threw his rod down. What happened to the rod? It became a snake. And then what did Pharaoh's enchanters and magicians do? Same thing. Satan has always been a counterfeiter. Satan has always counterfeited God. Satan always presents us with a synthetic version of reality. A synthetic version of reality. So, once again, God's man is here amongst the pagan astrologers, magicians, enchanters. Verse 21, and Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So Daniel's been there since the beginning. Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian, took him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was defeated by Cyrus, a Persian. So after the Babylonians, the Persians came into power. Cyrus was the one who defeated Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel's still there. He's still there with the exiles. The exiles are there for a total of 70 years. Okay? Now, we're in Daniel chapter 2, starting with verse 1. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. It's very similar to Joseph. Pharaoh had dreams. He could not sleep. He didn't know what the dreams meant. And remember, just like Pharaoh in Egypt, his enchanters, his magicians could not interpret the dream for him. Only Joseph could, the man of God. It's the same thing here. He could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, or Chaldean. And in the book of Daniel, I think there's 12 chapters. Yeah, 12 chapters in Daniel, I think. I'm pretty sure. From chapter 2, verse 4, this text, the original text, has been Hebrew. From chapter 2, verse 4, all the way until we get to chapter 8, that part of the text is written in Aramaic. So we go in the original text, we go Hebrew, Aramaic, and back to Hebrew, all within the same book. Okay? But we must remember, these people were multilingual. The language of power at this time was Aramaic. Just like in America, a lot of people speak the language from their homeland, but English is the language of power here. My grandfather came over on the boat from Germany. He was 7 years old. He came over on the boat from Germany the same year that Adolf Hitler was born. And I remember listening when Grandma would be talking to Grandpa, she would be talking in English. But then when she had a story to tell where she had to recall specific details, all of a sudden she'd start speaking to him in German, because she wanted to be she had to be very specific about what she was telling him. So for a while she'd talk in German, and then she'd come back to English. So it's not really that uncommon as some biblical scholars would like to make us believe. Okay, so there you answer the king in Aramaic. I'm on verse 4. O king, live forever. Suck-ups. They don't even, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Once more they replied, let the king tell his servants the dream and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is just one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. Something very interesting about this. These are Satan's people. Just like the magicians and enchanters for Pharaoh that Moses faced, Satan doesn't know what the dream is. Only God knows what that dream is. Only God and Nebuchadnezzar know what that dream is. Satan does not know what the dream is. As we go through this, we're going to talk about some of the mysteries of God. There's certain mysteries. There's some mysteries of God that He understands that we will never understand on earth. There's some mysteries that He keeps hidden, but He reveals to human beings as we progress through the planet. There's certain things that God keeps even secret from the angels. What do you think Satan thought when he saw Jesus hanging on that cross? God kept hidden from Satan His plan of redemption for us. Not even the angels knew that part of God's plan. He kept that hidden for good reason. Satan thought he was winning as he saw Jesus, the man, hanging on that cross. Satan thought he was winning because God kept secret. He kept hidden from him the entirety of the plan. We must always remember that. We must always remember that. Things are not falling apart around us. We're children of God. Things are not falling apart around us. They're coming together according to God's plan. God is in charge, which is why He gives us prophecies. But He never gives us all the prophecy. He doesn't give us the complete prophecy because we have an enemy. If we know it, Satan's going to learn it with us. It's actually to our benefit that we don't get the complete interpretation all at once, because we have an enemy. He learns some things along with us because God has a plan. God has a plan. He is always in control, always in charge, regardless of what it looks like around us. So, bad news. I'm on verse 10 in chapter 2. The astrologers answered the king, "There is not a man on earth who can do what the king asks." No, there's not. But there's a God in heaven who can. "No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among men." This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. That would include Daniel and his 3 friends. They're included in this group. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and the men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. Now look at the wisdom of Daniel here. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a decree?" He didn't act like everybody else. "Oh my God, this isn't fair. He's being unfair." Daniel, through God's wisdom, asked a question, get some information. He said, "Why? Why has the decree been issued?" He has the wisdom to ask a question, to get information. Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He urged them to plead for mercy from God of heaven concerning this. What is that word there? For those of you who are reading along, mystery. Plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery. Some things God keeps a mystery to us, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery, does yours say mystery? During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. And then Daniel prays to God, giving him thanks. So it's a vision in the night. Sometimes dream, vision, it can all be the same thing. Sometimes when they say vision in the night, it's basically a dream. So God's given Daniel the dream and the interpretation. So now, we are still in chapter 2, starting with verse 24. Daniel's coming to King Nebuchadnezzar to tell him what the dream is and to give him the interpretation of the dream. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." Does that sound familiar to you? Have we heard this story before? It's very similar to Joseph. Very similar to Joseph in Egypt. Where did we get the saying, history repeats itself? Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." We talked about this in Bible study yesterday. That's why the angels look down on us and marvel, because God kept hidden even from the angels His plan and how Jesus worked into the plan of our redemption. And the angels, they didn't understand, but now they look down and they marvel at human beings, because we can't see it a lot of times, but they can see that God lives within us. That's new in human history. That's new. And before Jesus, the Holy Spirit would come upon people for periods of time, but God did not dwell within all human beings who had faith. The angels look down on us and they marvel. So, Daniel replied, "No wise man, but there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you lay on your bed are these." Now remember, the purpose of prophecy, the reason God gives us prophecy is to assure us that He is in charge. And He tells us if a prophet comes to you and they recite something that they claim to have heard from me, how do we know if they're from God or not? If it comes true. If it doesn't come true, we know that they're false prophets. I hate to tell you this, but Jean Dixon is not a prophet of God. How do I know that? Because half of her prophecy... Do you guys know who Jean Dixon? Oh, okay. Well, sorry. She's famous, like, she's a, what would we call famous, like, psychic. She's a famous psychic. And she made some prediction about one of the presidents one time, made her very, very famous. So she started giving her prophecies for each year. And only half of them come true. So anyway, but I digress. I'm sorry. The reason for prophecy is God will tell us what's to come in the future. He doesn't tell us everything, but He'll give us information about the future to encourage us, to help us to understand that He is in charge. When we feel like things are falling apart around us, they're not. They're coming together according to God's plan. Okay? So, here we go. As you were lying there, O king, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this, what's the word? Mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than other living men, but so that you, O king, may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue. The king saw a large statue in his dream. An enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold. Amazing statue. The head is made of pure gold. Sorry, I lost my place for a second. Its chest and arms of silver. So the statue's chest and arms made of silver. Its belly and thighs of bronze. Belly, thighs of bronze. Its legs of iron. Legs of iron. Feet, this is important. Its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. So Nebuchadnezzar in his dream sees this amazing statue, head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet, this is important, feet partly of iron, partly of clay. Okay? While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It's cut out by God. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. So you put yourself in Nebuchadnezzar's shoes. You have that dream, and it's a different dream than any dream you've ever had before. What does this mean? He knows that he's been given something. This was a dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. You, O king, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands He has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, He has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. So Nebuchadnezzar himself is that head of gold. Nebuchadnezzar at this time rules the known world at that time. After you, another kingdom will rise inferior to yours. That's the Persians. Nebuchadnezzar was defeated by the Persian Cyrus. Xerxes was a Persian. We remember Xerxes, he made Esther, the Jew, queen. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. So the third kingdom of bronze, someone's going to defeat the Persians and rule the entire earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. So this fourth kingdom is going to defeat them all, going to be the greatest of all. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, this is very important, so this will be a divided kingdom. This fourth kingdom will be divided. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. So this fourth kingdom will be a mixture of people, and they will not remain united. In the time of those kings, the fourth kingdom, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. That's the rock that becomes a mountain and covers the whole earth. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. I have good news. That's all the scripture we have to read today. And I have even better news. Most theologians pretty much agree on that most of this vision of Nebuchadnezzar's that Daniel interprets, most of that has already been fulfilled. There's some dissension among biblical scholars, but I will give to you now the general consensus among theologians. The head of gold we know is the Babylon Empire. That's Nebuchadnezzar. The statue, and this is in your notes, the statue represents 4 successive human kingdoms in descending order of value and power. Thus the diminishing metals as we go down the body of the statue. The chest and arms of silver, that's the Persian Empire, Cyrus, Xerxes. There were some Medes. There were a couple of Mede kings. It's actually called the Medo-Persian Empire, but the Medes were not very strong and hardly ruled for any time at all. It's mostly Persian. The belly and thighs of bronze. The Greeks defeated the Persians. Alexander the Great defeated the Persians. At the age of 20, Alexander the Great set about conquering the entire known world. He ruled the known world while still in his 20s. Alexander the Great ruled what was then the known world while he was still in his 20s. And in America today, we suffer from perpetual adolescence, which we'll talk about another time. So, Alexander the Great, we believe, is the belly and thighs of bronze from Nebuchadnezzar's vision that God gave Daniel the interpretation to. Alexander the Great had a very inglorious end. He died at like 33, and it was not very glorious end. It was actually pretty base, and we don't need to talk about that. But it was the Roman Empire. It was the Roman Empire that eventually conquered the Greeks. But something that's very important. The Greeks are given credit for being the cradle of civilization in the Western world. The Greeks are given credit for the origin of Western thought. The great philosophers were Greek. Actually, the Romans, and they ruled the entire world for longer than any of the kingdoms before. And part of their strategy was, as they conquered people, they just assimilated them and let them keep their religions. They just assimilated them into the empire, rather than trying to force them to take on the Roman religion. It was part of their success. The Greeks had a system of gods and goddesses, Zeus. All the Romans did was take the Greek gods and goddesses and change their names to Roman. Zeus became Jupiter to the Romans. Apollo, who's the sun god for the Romans? Does anybody know? We have Ares is the Greek god of war. The Romans renamed him Mars. Now, something we have to understand, we are still very much under Roman influence. The Western civilization is still very much under Roman influence. We still adhere to the Roman calendar. Janus is the Roman god of new beginnings. The first month on our calendar is named January, after the Roman god Janus. Mars is the god of war. The gods traditionally went to war in the spring. Mars, the name March, the month of March is named after Mars, the Roman god Mars. July is named after Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar had an adopted son, and he changed his name to Augustus. And the month August is named after the Roman Emperor Augustus. So, we are still very much under Roman influence. And Christianity has been under Roman influence until a guy by the name of Martin Luther came around. The Holy Roman Empire, the Catholic Church was based in Rome. They ruled Christianity for basically 1,500 years. So we still have the Roman influence. We still have the Greek influence. Okay? Most biblical scholars, like I said, believe that the first three of these have been fulfilled. The belly and thighs of bronze, that's the Greeks under Alexander the Great. Some theologians, some biblical scholars think that the fourth empire has already been fulfilled. There was a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes. He went in 163 BC. He went in and he sacrificed a pig in the temple at Jerusalem, desecrated the temple. And Daniel talks about the desecration of the temple in next week. You really should come back next week. The story gets way better. Some theologians and scholars believe that it's all been fulfilled, but the cycle has begun again. Because in God's story, it is a cycle that tends to repeat itself. Remember Joseph in captivity? God gave him the ability to interpret dreams. Pharaoh had a dream. Remember Moses delivered the Egyptians out of Israel? They wandered the desert for 40 years. Jesus freed us from captivity, and the first thing that the Holy Spirit did after Jesus was baptized was lead him into the desert for 40 days. So there is a cycle that repeats itself in God's story in the Bible. I personally do not believe that the fourth part of this revelation has been fulfilled. Some people think that the Roman Empire is the Catholic Church. I don't believe that, but some people do. But we do know this. The Roman Empire who conquered the Greeks, the Roman Empire was split. There was a schism in the Roman Empire. The East, their capital, the Roman Empire, their capital in the East was Constantinople, named after Constantine, who became Christian. That city later became known as Istanbul. In the West, the Roman capital in the West was Rome, which still a lot of power rests in Rome. So we do know that that kingdom was split and did not remain united. And it included a mixture of peoples. I agree with most theologians, the overwhelming majority of theologians believe that this fourth part is yet to be fulfilled. And that is in line with the way God has revealed His plan to human beings since Adam. Since the fall, God has put in place His plan for redemption for human beings. And since the fall, we have an enemy. All the people in God's family have an enemy who's working against all of these promises being fulfilled. And remember, God keeps secret even from Him certain things. Okay, for our benefit. For our benefit. It seems what God's impressing upon me now is we have to remain faithful regardless of what's happening around us. Even if we don't know how our particular story ends. God reveals even to us individuals certain things, but He rarely gives us the entire package all at once. He rarely does that. He'll give us what we need to know at that particular time. He'll give us little bits, little scenes of what He has planned for us, and we'll be running along, we'll be riding the wave. I'm in God's will, I'm in God's will. And then something will happen and we'll start wondering, well, what happened? What did I do? Am I still in God's will? What's going on? It's all falling apart around me. No, it's not. It's not falling apart around you. God has a plan. He just hasn't shown you all of it yet. Okay? And it's for our benefit. We can trust that God is for us. He's our Father. Whatever He keeps hidden for Himself for a time, it's for our benefit. But He is in charge. Things are not falling apart. They are coming together, regardless of what's happening around you. These three wonderful members of the worship team are going to come up and do at least one more song. When they're finished, there'll be a couple of us up here who will pray for anyone that wants us to pray with them. But I encourage all of you, if you're comfortable with this, turn to the person beside you and say, is there anything that I can pray for you about? You don't have to come up here to one of the designated prayers. God lives in each and every one of you. His Spirit dwells in each and every one of you. And even if you're not comfortable, you know what? This is a very pleasing prayer to God. You can just join hands and you can say, "Yea, God." And that's a very pleasing prayer to God. It doesn't have to be some fancy words. But I encourage any of you who are comfortable with doing that, just turn to your neighbor and say, what can we pray about? Mm-hmm. And if you want to just grab hands and say, 1, 2, 3, yea, God, that will please Him. That will be a pleasing aroma.